Today we will deal with the relationship between history and psychology, and by now we all know that psychology also plays very important role. So much so that even in economic sciences, when Gaussen, then Jevons, Jevons, and then Walras, Baumgartner, and Schumpeter, all those people were also concerned with role of psychology in economics, and they have considered that when they were propounding this theory of marginal utility, they were conscious of the role of psychology in any determination of any choice. Similarly, in history also, there is an increasing demand that we should also try to look at this relationship between history and psychology. So today's lecture will be dealing with this theme. So, history and psychology, consciously or unconsciously, historians have always dabbled amateurishly and haphazardly, for the most part, in geography. Similarly, in their discussions, analysis of motives, actions of men, societies, they have to had to venture into the realm of psychology. You know, so G.M. Trevelyan, he believed that history remained literature rather than science by virtue of its need for deep insights into the minds of men. Later, commentators have rightly remarked that so long as the historian continued to back his own psychological insights without reference to the discoveries of modern psychology, he was producing, if not literature, at least certainly fiction. Because of their preoccupation with biographical approach to history, and the doings of great men, then historians of Trevelyan's generation had to make frequent recourse to their own amateurish psychological insights. Today, no historian could write a biographical study without showing or betraying something of the influence of what we call Freudian or post-Freudian psychology. Just how far the historical biographer should penetrate into the depth of psychology of his subject is by no means a settled matter. It's open to question, even among those historians who are most receptive to the influences of the social sciences. For one thing, the individual biography in this sense would not now normally be regarded as one of the most important forms of historical writing to take. Many of the greatest historical works of today have indeed been biographical in form, if no, but in content they are almost always of the life and times type. That is to say, they use biographical device to illuminate a far wider sector of human experience. If the main focus of attention in the biography is on the political and social achievements of the subject, on his relationships with various social groups, and with their reactions to him, there may be less need for detailed study of his own individual psychology than a purist might think of. Further, many of the great contemporary biographies, for example, Alan Bullock's Hitler, A Study in Tyranny, which was published in 1952, second edition came in 1962, is an obvious example. Biographies are concerned with men of quite extraordinary individual characteristics. Theories of psychopathology are almost all derived from the study of failures. Hitler was no failure, or at least not till he had destroyed half a continent. Historian is concerned less with Hitler's private fantasies than with his huge destructive achievements, even with achievements relative to him. Even with more normal figures, much of the detail might be yielded through use retrospectively, of course, and therefore imperfectly, of some of the techniques of psychoanalysis may well prove more appropriate to the higher gossip than to an understanding of major problems which exercise or should exercise in mind of the historian. Many of the nastier big men in history, Nazis are a good example, are widely believed to have been defective in their sexual equipment. The same point is sometimes even made about more conventional political leaders. The difficulties in finding hard evidence, as distinct from the inspired conjecture psychology, are for the historian immense. And even if he does find the evidence, hard evidence, how much further does this take him from his that exercise? These are merely qualifications, not in any way rebuttals or rejections of the highly stimulating attempts which have been made to bring the resources of psychology to the aid of historical biography, some of which we shall examine in a moment. They are, they are preliminaries to the statement of one simple point about the uses of psychology, which is too often ignored. Although there is in practice no rigid line between the individual psychology, which we have been discussing up till now, and the group and social psychology, which must be of the utmost value to the historian, the distinction is one which should always be borne in mind. In brief, one can say that just as the individual biography is a less significant area of study for the historian than a society, or a substantial segment of society is studied in totality, so individual psychology is less directly relevant to the need of the historian than is group psychology. Individual psychology will provide illuminating details. Social psychology may in some cases be a sine qua non of the intelligent analysis of certain historical problems. Where individual psychology can probably be of most significant utility is in helping to establish types of individual political leadership of great men within quote great man activity and in explaining aberrations in political behavior. Martin Luther was clearly a great man. No doubt, we all accept him as a great man in the sense of being a man whose actions did demonstrably affect the course of history. His stormy career has attracted legions of biographers, historical and fictional both. Before the First World War, one of the most distinguished, of 20th century American historians, you know, P. Smith, published both a biography and a collection of Luther's letters. They serve as a primary material for understanding Luther. He followed this up with an interesting paper published in 1915 on Luther's early development in the light of psychoanalysis. 40 years later, the subject was treated with greater sophistication by a practicing psychiatrist, Erik Erikson, the famous person. In his much acclaimed book, The Young Man Luther, a study in psychoanalysis and history, published in 1959, on which John Osborne subsequently based his successful play. The book makes fascinating reading, and in discussion of such matters as Luther's childhood conflicts with his father, his anxiety, his lifelong burden of excessive guilt, undoubtedly makes a major contribution to our understanding of Luther. Taking a broad overview of what has been previously discussed or said, it can be safely ascertained that there are vast tracts of history, even biographical history, where individual psychology is not a especially useful tool, though clearly some knowledge of psychology must replace Trevelyan's literary intuition. Erickson's study is a triumphant signal indicating the area of applicability of psychoanalysis to history. But it is a book by a psychiatrist bringing his expertise to bear on materials collected and collated by generations of historians. In India also, some people have attempted this. More interestingly, in many ways, is Sir Lewis Namier. His study of Charles Townshend, 1964. The brilliant English politician whose erratic political behavior has sometimes been regarded as a contributory cause of the American Revolution. A study drawn from a mass of unsorted manuscript material, but openly employing the categories of Freudian psychology and showing how conflicts between Townshend and his father produced a mental attitude towards authority which he carried over into the field of politics. Another analogous relationship was persuasively explored by Bruce Maslish, an American scholar again who has been in the vanguard in urging historians to master the skills of psychology. His famous book is James and John Stuart Mill, Father and Son in the 19th Century. He is making a very good analysis of this, published in 1975. The most sustained and scintillating, exciting demonstration of the importance to history of psychology is Peter Gay's Bourgeois Experience, Victoria to Freud. It's published in 2 volumes, 1984-86. This, he has discussed it in his in a primer study, Freud for Historians, and these two books are very interesting for understanding the role of psychology in history. So he is of the opinion that a study of 19th century bourgeois culture from a psychoanalytic perspective is quite fruitful exercise. Certainly the book is a treasure house, firmly grounded in an amazing range of family papers, no doubt about it. In 1988, Gay came up with a highly praised biography of Sigmund Freud, entitled Freud, A Life for Our Time. Nonetheless, it is psychology out of all the social sciences upon which the historian today is most likely to call. That this science may be regarded as a branch of sociology rather than as a branch of psychology only shows that history is not alone in having its demarcation difficulties, how to fix the boundaries. When we look back over the human past, one obvious feature stands out: the amount of time, the energy, human life, which has been expended in the most destructive of all man's activities, that is war. How psychology played a crucial role in war. Given their concern with the specific and the unique, historians will no doubt continue to place great emphasis on diplomatic exchanges, political and strategic calculations, and immediate social and economic circumstances which triggered the war. Yet, some of the broader generalizations made by some historians about, for example, the will to war to be detected in European societies on the eve of the First World War cry out for analysis in the light of important studies of human aggression produced by social psychologists. In general, the works of Konrad Lorenz and his disciples demonstrate how nasty a creature the human animal is and describe the conditions in which the nastiness is liable to break out in the form of a large scale violence or war. One such condition is overcrowding. Historians can demonstrate the rapidity with which urbanization was taking place in hitherto relatively pastoral European countries in the years before the First World War. They can also show impressionistically through a study of popular reading matter, music hall songs, modes, and language of public protests and demonstrations, as well as such high culture phenomena as futurist paintings, that there was something that can fairly be termed a will to war. With the assistance of the theorists of human aggression, they may then perceive a correlation between the two and more tenuously a possible explanation of the war as an objective fact, or at least why the war appeared to be welcome when it came. This is otherwise one should not never welcome. Then this is another complex area, I must say. In fact, individual psychology has been useful in driving home that human beings can simultaneously exercise conflicting emotions at the same time. Thus, the men who went to war in 1914 were both joyful and terrified, full of patriotic sentiments, and worried about their families. In the past, historians have been fascinated by the origins of wars. More recently, they have begun to pay due regard to the question of consequences of wars. In this realm, too, there is much to the learned from the studies of the social psychologists. The phenomenon of mass hysteria in the form of jingoistic patriotism has been noted with the assistance of social psychology. It can be discussed in a more rigorous and less impressionistic way. The effects of bombing upon civilian morale are a matter of interest to both psychologists and historians. Much of value can be found in the disaster studies undertaken by social psychologists. An understanding of the significance of group psychology for historian, we have seen, underlines much of the works of Marc Bloch and Lucien Lefebvre. Indeed, one of the most characteristic achievements of French school was the emphasis it gave to the study of mentalities, the worldview, the perceptions, the attitude of mind of past peoples. So they are dealing with the psychological factor. Involvement in the problems of crowd psychology led George Rude and others into some fascinating work on the role of crowd in various revolutionary upheavals, how they reacted and why they reacted in that particular manner, and in other disturbances. Psychological insights into the effects of factory discipline, into the human consequences of creating a new emphasis on clocks and timekeeping, have brought a new qualitative element into the assessment of social consequences of industrial revolution. The concepts of reference groups by which people censor their activities or assess their standards of living and the relative deprivation have helped to some extent some of the imprecision out of the traditional study of social conditions. As might again be expected, some of the most imaginative historical works bringing in social psychology has been carried out by the French historians. The work of Leroy Ladurie in endeavoring to penetrate the mental outlook of small communities in France in the early 14th century and in the 17th century has already been mentioned. Marc Ferro and Pierre Sorlin have brought psychological perceptions to bear not only in conventional historical writing but also in their pioneering analysis of film. After admitting to the unfashionable nature of biography, Sorlin said of his Waldeck Rousseau, 1966, that it might well be called an essay in psychological portraiture. So I was saying Marc Ferro and Pierre Sorlin, they were of this opinion. After admitting to the unfashionable nature of biography, Sorlin observed in his Waldeck Rousseau, 1966, published, that it might well be called an essay in psychological portraiture. And it needs to be read to understand this book. Save that such a title seemed a bit ambitious. His La Croix et les Joffs, 1880 to 1899, that is, Contribution à la histoire de antisemitisme contemporain, 1967, was very much a work in the study of a collective psychological phenomenon, the passionate hostility of a community against the minority, judged inadmissible. So, to conclude, the books which we have set out deliberately to provide exercises in the use of psychology, particularly psychoanalysis, are less rewarding than the wider studies of the crowd, of the bourgeoisie, of war, of which we have put psychology to work as a tool in the greater enterprise. But then, that is what keeps the overall view of the relationship between individual social sciences to history, a view that is hotly contested by many social scientists and all simulationists. The problem with bringing in the question of psychology in the interpretation of historical fact is that when you are making a selection of a choice, you are selecting certain facts, your mental aptitude is working behind, because you are in a dialogue with your document. So that dialogue with the document cannot happen until unless you have some psychological questions to ask from the to extract from the documents. So this is what this is where psychology becomes very important. And here I conclude by saying that there is a great challenging subject of tracing the relationship between history and psychology. But definitely this will such a study will improve our knowledge of history, our epistemological things about history. So therefore, all these subjects which I have discussed so far regarding pure sciences, coming down to methodical sciences, then coming down to social sciences. Today I completed with human psychology. So you will find that there the historical enterprise keeps on expanding, not only with the with the expansion in the knowledge of tools, it also goes on expanding with the knowledge of various disciplines which are being taught now in modern universities. Thank you very much.